Pacific Theater, 1943. The deafening roar of engines drowns out the labored breathing of Lieutenant James Harlow as his P-47 Thunderbolt climbs steeply into the azure sky. His knuckles whiten around the control stick, sweat beading on his forehead despite the biting cold at 30,000 feet. The innovative XP-47J prototype beneath him, heralded as engineering brilliance, harbors a deadly secret. "Come on, baby," he whispers through clenched teeth, his vision already narrowing. The altimeter needle climbs relentlessly while black spots dance across his eyes. Unlike the standard P-47s, this experimental variant pushes boundaries that the human body simply cannot endure. In the command center below, Major William Roberts watches the radar blip with growing concern. "Harlow, report status," he barks into the radio. Static answers him as the blip suddenly veers off course. Miles away, test pilot Catherine Miller studies design schematics with furrowed brows. She had warned them about the potentially catastrophic pressure system flaw. 10 seconds, she murmurs, tracing a finger along the oxygen delivery diagram. That's all it takes before the pilot loses consciousness. The radar blip begins a terrifying descent. In the cockpit, Harlow's limp body slumps forward against his restraints, the stick pushed dangerously forward, as the most brilliant aircraft design in American military history plummets toward the Pacific Ocean, carrying with it the weight of ambition, oversight, and human limitations. December 1941. James Harlow stands motionless on the oil-slicked harbor of Pearl Harbor, the acrid smell of burning fuel still hanging in the air days after the Japanese attack. His brother's ship, the USS Arizona, lies beneath the dark waters, a steel tomb for hundreds including his younger brother Michael. "I should have convinced him to join the Air Corps with me," he whispers to the waves, survivor's guilt etching deeper lines around his eyes. 8 months later, in a dimly lit laboratory at Republic Aviation, Catherine Miller adjusts her glasses, reviewing pressure calculations for the third time. As one of the few female aeronautical engineers permitted to work on military projects, her margin for error is non-existent. The daughter of a crop duster pilot who taught her to fly against her mother's wishes, Catherine understands both the mathematics and the visceral reality of flight better than most of her male colleagues. The cabin pressurization system won't compensate adequately above 28,000 feet, she explains to a room of skeptical officers. The human body can't adapt that quickly to pressure changes at that altitude. Major William Roberts, a decorated pilot turned program administrator, dismisses her concerns with a wave. The Germans are developing high-altitude fighters that will dominate the skies. We need to match them, not coddle our pilots. Roberts carries his own demons, a leg injury that grounded him permanently and the bitter knowledge that younger men now fight the battles he can only coordinate from behind a desk. His desperation for a technological advantage clouds his judgment, pushing safety margins beyond reasonable limits. Meanwhile, in the training fields of Texas, James completes his advanced flight training, driven by the ghost of his brother. The memory of Michael's laugh haunts his dreams, the same dreams where he reaches for the controls of a plane that won't respond, spiraling toward the ocean's surface as his lungs scream for oxygen. Just mechanical anxiety, the flight surgeon tells him. It'll pass. The XP-47J project accelerates under pressure from Washington. An intelligence report reveals German efforts to develop high-altitude interceptors that could potentially turn the air war in their favor. Catherine works 18-hour days, her calculations repeatedly overruled by Roberts' team in favor of performance improvements. During a rare moment of downtime, she encounters James at the officers' club near Republic Aviation's Long Island facility. Their conversation moves from casual pleasantries to technical discussions as James reveals a surprising understanding of aerodynamics from his civilian engineering studies before the war. "My brother used to say I think too much about how things work instead of just using them," he says with a sad smile. "Sometimes thinking too much is exactly what's needed," Catherine replies, seeing in James a potential ally who might understand her concerns about the XP-47J. Their connection deepens through letters when James is transferred to a combat squadron in the Pacific. Catherine keeps her growing personal feelings carefully separated from her professional warnings about the aircraft's design flaws. Meanwhile, Roberts pushes the prototype into production, ignoring test results that show alarming rates of pilot blackouts during simulations. I'd love to hear where you're watching this video from in the comments below. Are you an aviation enthusiast, history buff, or both? By early 1943, with the air war intensifying on multiple fronts, the pressure to deploy the XP-47J becomes overwhelming. James, now a battle-hardened pilot with 5 confirmed kills, volunteers to test the prototype in actual combat conditions despite Catherine's cryptic warning in her last letter: "The bird soars too high too fast. Remember your oxygen." Spring 1943. The humid air of the Pacific Naval Base clings to James' skin as he walks the tarmac, eyes fixed on the sleek lines of the XP-47J. Its distinctive profile, more streamlined than the standard Thunderbolt, promises speeds approaching 500 miles per hour and a ceiling well above 40,000 feet. Capabilities that could change the course of the air war. "She's a beauty, isn't she?" Lieutenant Colonel Frank Westwood appears beside him, slapping James' back with manufactured camaraderie. Westwood, representing the Pentagon's procurement division, has staked his career on the XP-47J program. "Tomorrow's test flight will make history, Harlow. You'll be taking American engineering to heights the Zeros can only dream about." James nods, but Catherine's warnings echo in his mind. During his pre-flight briefing, he raises questions about the oxygen system's capabilities at extreme altitudes. "The standard protocol is sufficient," Westwood interrupts, shooting a warning glance at the flight surgeon who shifts uncomfortably. "We've addressed previous concerns." Later that night, James finds a note slipped under his barracks door: "Maintenance hangar. 2,300 hours." He recognizes the handwriting from months of correspondence. Catherine has risked her career and military clearance to fly to the Pacific base, ostensibly to monitor instrumentation during the test flight. In the shadows of the maintenance hangar, surrounded by the smell of oil and metal, she shows James classified data from simulator tests. 3 test pilots experienced complete blackouts above 35,000 feet, she whispers urgently. The pressurization system fails catastrophically when combined with high-G maneuvers. The oxygen mask can't compensate fast enough. You'll have less than 10 seconds of consciousness. "Why wasn't this reported?" James asks, though he already suspects the answer. Roberts classified the results. He's convinced himself the pilots weren't following proper protocols. Catherine's hands tremble slightly. "Westwood's team altered my final designs without recalculating the pressure differentials." Their conversation is interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. Technical Sergeant Ray Donahue, James' longtime crew chief, appears in the doorway. His face hardens at the sight of Catherine. "Ma'am, you shouldn't be here," he says stiffly. "And Lieutenant, the Colonel is looking for you." The next morning reveals the first fracture in the squadron's unity. Half the pilots, briefed quietly by James about the potential risks, express concerns about the test flight. Westwood responds by removing 2 of the most vocal objectors from the program entirely. "Cowardice disguised as caution has no place in this war," he announces to the remaining pilots. His eyes find James. "I expected better from you, Lieutenant. Especially given your brother's sacrifice." The invocation of Michael's death as manipulation ignites a cold fury in James. That afternoon, he seeks out Donahue, uncertain where the sergeant's loyalties lie after the previous night's encounter. He finds the crew chief meticulously inspecting the XP-47J's oxygen system. "She was right, wasn't she?" Donahue asks without looking up. "The system's inadequate." James nods. "Can you fix it before tomorrow's flight?" Donahue's expression darkens. "Not without parts we don't have and authorization I'll never get. But I can modify the warning system to give you a few extra seconds notice before pressure drops. It's not much, but it could be enough," James finishes. Later that day, Catherine is ordered back to Washington by an irate Roberts, who somehow learned of her unauthorized briefing. Before leaving, she slips James a modified flight plan that keeps the aircraft below the critical altitude threshold while still demonstrating its superior speed and maneuverability. "This will give them their test results without risking your life," she tells him. Their farewell is brief but charged with unspoken emotions. The night before the test flight, Westwood summons James to his office. Tomorrow's flight plan has been revised, he announces, sliding a folder across the desk. We need data from 40,000 feet. Washington's orders. James examines the new flight plan, immediately recognizing the danger. Sir, with respect, this plan ignores safety protocols established by a woman who overstepped her authority and has been removed from this project, Westwood cuts in coldly. The decision is final, Lieutenant. Either you fly this mission, or we find someone who will follow orders without question. Dawn breaks with ominous storm clouds gathering on the horizon. As James suits up for the flight, Donahue hands him a modified oxygen mask. It's the best I could do, he murmurs. Don't push past the first warning signal. If you're enjoying this historical deep dive, please hit that like button and subscribe to help us reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers. Your support means everything as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of aviation history to life. James climbs into the cockpit, acutely aware that his decision to proceed places him at the nexus of military obedience, scientific integrity, and personal honor. As the canopy closes, he catches sight of Westwood watching from the control tower, and beside him, unexpectedly, Major Roberts, who has apparently flown in overnight. The presence of both men confirms James' suspicion. This is no longer just a test flight. It's a high-stakes demonstration with careers and contracts hanging in the balance, and his life serving as the variable they seem most willing to risk. The XP-47J thunders down the runway, its massive propeller clawing at the humid Pacific air. James feels the familiar push against his spine as the experimental fighter breaks free from gravity, climbing at a rate that makes standard Thunderbolts seem lethargic by comparison. Through the radio comes Westwood's voice, clinical and detached. Proceed to checkpoint Alpha. Maintain climb rate. At 20,000 feet, the aircraft performs flawlessly. James executes a series of tight turns and rolls, testing the improved control surfaces. The horizon tilts and swings in his vision as he puts the machine through maneuvers that would tear the wings off lesser aircraft. Handling characteristics exceptional, he reports, professional despite his misgivings. Continue climb to 30,000 feet, Roberts' voice now unexpected in its authority. Proceed with high-altitude performance assessment. James' hand hesitates momentarily on the throttle. Copy that, he responds, knowing that each 1,000 feet brings him closer to the threshold Catherine warned about. He glances at the modified warning system Donahue installed. Still quiet, but for how long? At 28,000 feet, the first signs appear. A subtle pressure change in his ears, more pronounced than normal despite the oxygen mask. The aircraft continues to climb eagerly, but James' body registers what the engineering team chose to ignore. The cabin pressurization isn't keeping pace with the external pressure drop. Status report, demands Westwood. Aircraft performing within parameters, James responds, deliberately omitting his physiological observations. Request permission to level off at 32,000 feet for horizontal speed test. Negative. Proceed to 40,000 as planned. As the altimeter passes 30,000 feet, Donahue's warning system flickers to life, an amber light on the instrument panel. James immediately adjusts his oxygen flow, buying precious seconds. The thickness in his head grows more pronounced, his vision beginning to narrow slightly at the edges. I'm experiencing initial symptoms of hypoxia, he reports, his voice steady despite the growing danger. Recommend descent to 25,000 feet to verify instrumentation. The radio crackles with heated voices, Roberts and Westwood arguing over the protocol. Finally, Roberts' voice emerges victorious. Maintain course to 40,000 feet, Lieutenant. The symptoms are anticipated and temporary. James' jaw tightens. With respect, sir, I'm the pilot in command of this aircraft. Safety protocols dictate. That was an order, Lieutenant, Roberts cuts in coldly. At 33,000 feet, the amber warning light turns red. James' fingers begin to feel strangely distant, his reaction time slowing perceptibly. The brilliant blue sky above seems to darken at the edges of his vision. He knows what's coming, 10 seconds, maybe less, before unconsciousness. In that moment of clarity facing imminent disaster, James makes his decision. He sharply rolls the aircraft 180 degrees and points the nose down, simultaneously cutting back the throttle. The sudden negative G-forces send his blood rushing to his head, a dangerous maneuver under normal circumstances, but one that might momentarily counteract the hypoxia long enough for him to descend to safer altitude. "What the hell are you doing?" Westwood shouts through the radio. "Level off immediately." James doesn't respond, focusing every remaining ounce of consciousness on maintaining controlled descent. The altimeter unwinds rapidly, 32,000. 30,000. His vision begins to return as oxygen-rich blood reaches his brain again. At 25,000 feet, he levels off, breathing heavily into his mask. Aircraft control regained, he reports tersely. Experienced complete onset of hypoxia symptoms at 33,000 feet. Oxygen system insufficient for high-altitude operations. "Return to base immediately," Roberts orders, his voice tight with barely contained fury. As James banks the aircraft toward the airfield, a new voice breaks through on the emergency frequency. "Catherine." "James, can you hear me? There's a situation you need to know about." Through her hurried explanation, the final piece falls into place. During her forced return to Washington, Catherine discovered that Roberts had received intelligence about a squadron of new Japanese high-altitude interceptors moving into the region. The XP-47J test wasn't just about performance data. It was a desperate attempt to counter an imminent threat. "They're coming in high, above 35,000 feet, she explains. "Targeting the carrier group 70 miles northeast of your position. Our standard fighters can't reach them." James processes this information against the reality he just experienced. "And they're sending pilots up in aircraft that will cause them to black out before they can engage the enemy." "Exactly," Catherine confirms grimly. 3 squadrons are being scrambled now with the same inadequate oxygen systems. The moral calculus becomes clear and terrible. Return to base as ordered, knowing dozens of pilots might fly to their deaths, or use the aircraft's superior speed to intercept and warn the approaching squadrons, potentially sacrificing his career or worse. Without hesitation, James pushes the throttle forward and banks sharply northeast, ignoring the barrage of increasingly threatening orders from Westwood and Roberts. "I need exact coordinates of our squadrons," he tells Catherine, who has clearly risked court-martial by breaking radio protocols. "Transmitting now," she responds. "James, be careful. You know what happens above 33,000 feet. Then I'll just have to stay below it," he answers grimly, pushing the XP-47J to its maximum horizontal speed, racing against time, physics, and human limitations to prevent a disaster born of hubris and desperation. James streaks across the Pacific sky, the XP-47J performing magnificently at 32,500 feet, just below his empirically established danger zone. The radio crackles with increasingly desperate orders from base, now threatening court-martial, but these fade beneath the higher priority of intercepting the American squadrons heading toward disaster. 20 minutes later, he spots them, 3 formations of standard P-47s climbing steadily through 30,000 feet, unaware of the physiological time bomb ticking inside their cockpits. James pushes his aircraft alongside the lead formation, waggling his wings to get their attention. Using emergency frequencies, he broadcasts the stark reality. "All squadrons, be advised, oxygen systems insufficient above 33,000 feet. You will experience rapid onset hypoxia. Japanese interceptors operating at 38,000 feet. Do not, repeat, do not exceed 32,000 feet ceiling." Squadron Commander Ellis Parker's voice responds with confusion, then anger. "Harlow, return to base immediately. We have our orders." "Your orders will kill every pilot in these squadrons," James replies bluntly. "I've just experienced it firsthand in this prototype. The system fails catastrophically at altitude. You've got less than 10 seconds from onset to unconsciousness." A tense silence follows. Parker, a veteran with 3 years of combat experience, recognizes the deadly seriousness in James' voice. What's your alternative? Engage at 32,000. Draw them down to our altitude. Their oxygen systems likely have similar limitations. It's a tactical gamble, but one based on Catherine's analysis of captured Japanese aircraft equipment. Parker makes his decision. All squadrons, maintain 32,000 feet. Prepare for high-altitude intercept strategy Delta. The battle that unfolds tests every limit of man and machine. The Japanese pilots, flying the new Ki-61, Tony, fighters with their own experimental high-altitude systems, initially hold the altitude advantage. But as James predicted, they can't effectively engage without descending, gradually being drawn down to where the American P-47s wait with their superior firepower. In the chaotic dogfight that follows, James scores 2 confirmed kills, but takes heavy damage to his control surfaces. As he limps back toward base with the victorious but battered American squadrons, the full weight of his insubordination settles on his shoulders. 3 weeks later, in a sparse military courtroom on Oahu, James stands at attention before a panel of senior officers. The charges are serious: direct disobedience of orders, unauthorized communication of classified information, and endangering an experimental aircraft. The fact that his actions likely saved 3 squadrons of pilots offers mitigating circumstances but doesn't erase the formal breaches of military protocol. Colonel Harrison, the presiding officer, reviews the final testimonies. This court has heard sufficient evidence regarding Lieutenant Harlow's actions. Before rendering judgment, we will hear final statements from Major Roberts. Roberts rises slowly, his face carved with lines of fatigue and something else, perhaps remorse. To James' astonishment, the major who had been his primary antagonist doesn't deliver the expected condemnation. The failure of the XP-47J high-altitude oxygen system was known to me, Roberts states flatly. Engineer Miller's warnings were documented and deliberately suppressed under my authority. Lieutenant Harlow's actions, while constituting technical insubordination, prevented the loss of approximately 54 aircraft and pilots. His gaze meets James directly. The failure was mine, not his. The courtroom erupts in murmurs. Colonel Harrison gavels for silence. Major Roberts, are you submitting yourself for disciplinary action? I am, sir. The judgment, when it comes, reflects the military's perpetual balancing act between discipline and pragmatism. James receives a formal reprimand for insubordination but is also awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for preventing the loss of 3 squadrons. Roberts accepts reduction in rank and reassignment to a training command in the continental United States. Catherine faces her own reckoning at Republic Aviation. Despite vindication of her warnings, her unauthorized communications during the crisis violated numerous security protocols. She is removed from military projects but offered a position in the company's civilian aviation division, a sideways move that many would consider a demotion but that she recognizes as an opportunity to work with greater autonomy. 6 months later, a significantly redesigned oxygen system becomes standard in all high-altitude American fighters. The official documentation credits multiple sources for identifying the critical flaw, carefully avoiding public admission of the near disaster. Winter 1944. Catherine sits at her drafting table in Republic's Civilian Division, working late on a pressurization system for post-war commercial aviation. A knock at the door reveals James, now Captain Harlow, his uniform bearing the insignia of a test pilot instructor. I heard you're revolutionizing airline safety, he says with a slight smile. Apparently someone convinced the brass that passengers might also prefer not to pass out at high altitudes. Their reunion is both professional and personal, 2 people forever changed by their confrontation with institutional momentum and physical limitations. James carries invisible scars, occasional headaches and brief dizzy spells, likely consequences of his high-altitude oxygen deprivation. Catherine bears the professional marginalization that came with being right at the wrong time. They're still pushing the altitude envelope, she tells him, showing designs for a new generation of fighters. But at least they're testing the human elements now, not just the machines. On a clear spring day in 1945, as the war in Europe ends and the Pacific conflict intensifies toward its atomic conclusion, James and Catherine stand together on the observation deck at Republic's test field. Below them, a modified P-47N demonstrates the new pressure system Catherine helped design despite her official removal from military projects. "Sometimes I wonder if we've learned anything," James muses, watching the aircraft climb through 40,000 feet without incident. Higher, faster, deadlier, always pushing against human limitations without acknowledging them. Catherine's hand finds his. "But we pushed back. That has to count for something." In the decades that follow, as commercial aviation makes the world smaller and military jets break sound barriers, the lessons of the XP-47J incident remain mostly classified. Yet its legacy lives on in rigorous high-altitude testing protocols and redundant safety systems. Occasional declassified accident reports reference Harlow's 10-second rule, the recognition that human physiological limits must be incorporated into aircraft design from inception, not as an afterthought. Technical Sergeant Donahue, whose quick modifications to the warning system likely saved James' life, receives no official recognition. He returns to civilian life as an airline mechanic, occasionally sharing cryptic stories about, "That time we nearly lost a whole Air Corps because someone wouldn't listen to a woman engineer." Few believe him. Major Roberts, demoted to captain, finds unexpected fulfillment training new pilots, his hard-earned wisdom about the relationship between man and machine making him an exceptional instructor. He never flies again himself, but his insistence on physiological awareness saves countless lives over his remaining career. The XP-47J itself, the brilliant design that nearly proved catastrophic, is modified extensively and eventually enters limited production as the P-47M. Its official service ceiling is listed at 38,000 feet, a number that pilots quietly understand to mean mechanical capability, not human survivability without specialized equipment. In 1955, at a reunion of Pacific Theater pilots, James overhears a young jet jockey boasting about a new altitude record. He exchanges glances with several veterans of the 1943 campaign, their silent understanding bridging the gap between generations. Some lessons are passed forward even when the official record remains silent. July 1985. A retirement ceremony at Edwards Air Force Base. Catherine Miller Harlow, now closing a distinguished career in aerospace physiology, stands at a podium before a new generation of test pilots and engineers. Behind her, displayed under museum lighting, rests the restored cockpit section of an XP-47J, a teaching tool rather than a glorified relic. The history of aviation has always been written in two parallel ledgers, she tells the audience. One records the triumph of human ingenuity over the constraints of physics. The other, often written in blood, documents our stubborn refusal to acknowledge human limitations until they're proven in tragedy. James watches from the front row, silver-haired now but still carrying himself with a pilot's posture. Their life together has spanned the evolution of flight from propellers to jets to space shuttles, each breakthrough accompanied by new challenges to human physiology. The most dangerous phrase in aviation remains, "brilliant design," Catherine continues. Because brilliance without empathy for the human element creates monuments to engineering that humans cannot safely operate. She gestures to the XP-47J cockpit. 10 seconds. That was all it took between perfect function and catastrophic failure. Not because the machine failed, but because the machine's designers failed to fully account for the human inside it. As the ceremony concludes, a young female test pilot approaches James. "Is it true you flew against orders to save those squadrons, sir?" James smiles slightly. "The official record says I was conducting an authorized tactical demonstration of high-altitude limitations." "And the unofficial record?" His eyes find Catherine across the room. "The unofficial record says that sometimes the most important instrument in any cockpit is the courage to trust what your body tells you over what your orders demand." The lessons of the brilliant aircraft that could render pilots unconscious in 10 seconds have been integrated into decades of aerospace design, rarely acknowledged directly but visible in every oxygen system, pressure warning, and physiological training protocol developed since. The silent testimony to lives saved by failure acknowledged rather than failure repeated. The true victory wasn't technological but human, the recognition that even in war, with its brutal calculations of acceptable loss, some costs are too high to bear. That breakthrough designs must serve human capability, not sacrifice it on the altar of performance specifications. If you've enjoyed this exploration of forgotten aviation history, please hit that subscribe button and share this video with fellow history enthusiasts. Let us know in the comments which historical aircraft mysteries you'd like us to investigate next. From overlooked design flaws to heroic test pilots who changed aviation safety forever, there are countless stories waiting to be told. Until next time, keep looking skyward. Just make sure your oxygen system is working properly before you do.